I recently ran across a switch in a UI, and if I clicked, you see it has this kind of elastic looking feel to it. So I set off to duplicate this on my own, and this video is the result. Now I couldn't find a way to do this with just HTML and CSS, but after watching it, maybe you have a good idea. All right, ready for a fun CSS challenge? Let's jump right in. So I've got VS Code open on the left. I've got just my web browser open on the right with that preview once again. I'm going to come over this way and just right click to add a new file. We'll do index.html. And I'm also going to go ahead and add let's do a main.css. And then one more, we'll do an app.js. So we will use each of these files as we get going. And again, maybe you have another way of doing this that doesn't require all of these files. Maybe you can do this just with CSS and HTML, but this is the only way I could think to do this. Now, inside of here, let's go ahead and do a bang and then just enter to add this all with Emmet. I'm going to say, let's call this a toggle. How about an elastic toggle switch? Something like that. And then inside here, I'm going to have a container. And then this is where we're going to do our switches. I will go ahead and add a couple so that way we can actually see how these work in real life. And I'm going to close the sidebar and zoom in just a touch. So let's start with adding just something we're going to call a custom check wrapper. Right, this is actually going to be a div that holds everything we need inside of here. We're going to need three separate things. We're going to need an input, and this will have a type of checkbox. Now I need to give this some kind of ID, so we'll call this, I don't know, let's call this like setting 1 or something like that. And that way we can tie the label to the input. Now there's one other important thing we need to do here, and that is to set this as a role of switch, because we're basically going to say that this is going to switch something back and forth, and this will help with assistive technology. That's my understanding. Now next, I'm going to come in here and say custom check like this, and then inside here we'll do custom check thumb. Now these are both just divs, but we're going to style these to make it look exactly like that checkbox. I'll talk you through why we're doing this in just a second. Next, let's grab a label here, and this 4 needs to point to my ID, so we'll say setting 1. And then let's have it say whatever it is, so we'll say enable setting 1. All right, so why are we doing it this way? Well, what we're going to be doing is actually checking this input right here, and as we check it, we actually want to hide the box itself because it's difficult to style, and there's so many different browser settings that show by default, so we'll just hide it altogether. And instead what we're going to do is whenever we check this, we will then look at its sibling, which is this custom check, and we will move this thumb back and forth within it. Now by creating this as an input and a label, that also means that we can click on the text and it will also work the exact same as if we clicked over this way. So that's why we're creating it this way. Let me go ahead and let's just duplicate this one time. So I'm going to grab all this, hit Option and Shift and the down arrow. That will duplicate it. And then let's just change this here to setting 2, setting 2, and setting 2. All right, now with all that set and ready to go, I'm going to click Go Live down here. This is an extension called Live Server, and that should spin up a dev server here. You can see we've got everything we need over this way. All right, now that's all the HTML we're going to add. Let me go ahead and jump over to the CSS. I'm going to start with just a basic clear that kills all the padding, the margin, and sets everything to border box. And in order for any of this to take place, I got to come over this way and actually add it in the CSS. So let's say link CSS, and here we're going to call this main. All right, there we go. Now it's working over this way. Let's jump back over here. The next thing I want to do is add a root. Now, this root is going to determine the different styles that I want applied, and I'm going to use a bunch of CSS variables to make that happen. So let's start with a color. So maybe we just have a like accent or something like that. And I'm going to use HSL values because they're easy to manipulate one way or the other. Normally you'd have HSL and then wrap it like this. However, I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I like to just declare them as number strings and then basically use them when I'm writing my CSS to determine if I want them to have opacity or not. Let me show you that in just a second here. So let's say something like 220, which is like a blue color, maybe 50% on the saturation, and let's do like 60% on the lightness. All right, so with that set, let's grab our body here and let me show you how I'm doing this. So we'll say background color, and now what I need to do is wrap this in HSL. Then I'm going to take my variable here of accent. If I do this, you should see that it all takes on this color. Maybe I actually want to reduce this just a touch and maybe boost this a touch as well. Now, why would I do it this way? Well, the reason I'm doing it this way is because I want to be able to add opacity just like this. So I could say 0.2 and you can see it now suddenly it's very opaque. And it's easy to do that on the fly when I need it. I think we might use it in this project some, so that's how I typically like to write my colors. We'll go ahead and set this. I'm going to change this to like a background color. And then let's grab this here And maybe let's extract the hue value here. All right, so we'll set this hue to 220, and that way we can update it once, and it could update all throughout the site. So I'll grab all of these and set this to my var of hue. All right, and then for the background, let's do the same thing here. Let's set this more to like 30, so it's not as saturated, and set this to 98. And then we'll also have a text value. And here we'll do the same thing, except we'll just reduce the lightness. All right, so with all that set, you can see that this takes on just a slight blue hue, and just to show that to you, if I change that there, you can see that it is actually picking up that color. Let's go ahead and copy this down, and we'll just take the color here and set this to text. All right, now those are my colors. There's one other thing I'm going to want to set here, and that would be a font size. So let's go ahead and set a font size, and I'm going to do font size 400, and this is how I like to write them, and then that way this is kind of my standard, is my 400, and I can go up from there in size or down from there in size. And let's set this to something like 1 point, I don't know, maybe we even set it to like 2 rem. We can adjust it then as we need to. So I'll come down here once again, we'll say font size, and I'll point this to my font size of FS400. And next, let's set the font family. And I'm going to jump over here to fonts.google.com. And let's just grab a thing we need. Let's see. This will work. All right, let's grab this. This is from Enter. If you want to do this yourself, maybe I should show you how to do that. You can come over here and click on Enter, and then jump down here. And all you do is, if I can close the sidebar, select whatever ones you want, and then it will open the sidebar for you. And you can just select all of this. We'll add this to the HTML. So if I jump over this way, let's add it below the title. And then I'll grab my font family here, and I'll add that right here. All right, let's move back over this way, and you can see that that has already applied. And let's go ahead and finish out the body styling here. We're going to say this needs to be display of grid, and then place items center. This will put everything in the center of the screen, as long as I have min height here set to 100 view height as a minimum. All right, so there we go. Everything's in the middle. Now everything else is wrapped inside of a container class. So we'll say display grid, and then we'll say gap of, let's just use my font size. So I'll say FS400, which is 2 rem, I think, and that way it corresponds to it. All right, so those are spaced out by just a gap of that 2 rem. Now everything in my custom check is inside a custom check wrapper, all right, for both of those. Now these, because I'm going to set them next to each other, I want them to be display flex, and then align items of center. That vertically aligns them so that they're spaced out exactly. Now if I don't have this, you can see how they may not be exactly in the middle. When I add this back in, that box moves down just a touch. Now to space these out, I'm going to set the gap here to 0.75 em. Now you may not want to use gap yet with flex if you don't feel like it's supported well enough, but for this little project, I'm more than happy to do that. Now I do want this to be position relative, because this box itself I'm going to stretch out to match everything right over here. And I want it to be relative to its parent, this custom check wrapper. Now when it comes to the actual checks, we can select these in a few different ways, but since we went ahead and defined a role for it, let's use the role selector here. So I'll say role equals switch, like that, and I can select anything with the switch, and all of my switches on my site should look the same, so that makes it easy to select them. Now here what I want to do is set my appearance to none, and then I also want to set my WebKit appearance to none. And as soon as I say this, you'll see that it just disappears altogether. So for now, let's comment these out just so we can see the rest of what I'm going to do here. I want these to be position of absolute, and then I'm going to set these inset to 0 and cursor to pointer. Now, by doing it this way, it's going to move it to the very middle, and even though it's only showing here in the middle, it's spanning the entire section wherever this custom wrapper is. In fact, if I say border 1 pixel, solid, and red, you can see that it spans this entire section. So if I click over here, it checks the box. Anywhere on the text, it checks the box, so it expands to that whole section. Now, the reason I'm doing it this way is because it makes it easier when I add in my little toggle switch. But if I check the text either way, because they're connected by the ID, it should actually check the box as well. But anyhow, so I'm not doing it so much for the checking as much as I am just for how it looks, that the cursor shows up everywhere as a pointer. All right, so with that explanation, let's go ahead and get rid of that, and let's get rid of that. Okay, so now they've disappeared. Let's create our own custom check. Now, if you remember in the HTML over this way, you'll see that I have custom check as this div with custom check thumb in the middle. So that's what we're going to be applying styles to. So custom check. And what I want to do is set this to a width of, in this case, what I want is 3em. I'm using M because that will respond to the font size. So as I change the font size, everything else will adjust with it. So we'll say a width of 3em, and then I'll say a height of 1.5 Next, let's set this background color, and I want to create another variable. Up top, we're going to create something called muted. Now, right now that doesn't exist, so nothing will show, but if I move back up this way, we can go ahead and copy this down, and I'll change this to muted, and let's do something like, I don't know, 20, and we'll do like 90%. All right, so there we go. We get this nice muted color, and it's connected to our hue value. If I move back down this way, we've got that set. Now I want to set a border radius. To make sure you always have a complete circle or pill shape, whatever it happens to be. In this case, it's wider than it is high, so it'll be a pill. If you do 100 V max, it will take the largest size of either the vertical or the horizontal space. So even if they turn like their phone sideways, it will then take that to then set the border radius. So it'll always be a pill shape. Now the little thumb switch inside is going to be positioned relative to this parent. So I want this to be a position of relative, otherwise the thumb switch will be absolute positioned to the entire parent container. And I don't want that. I just want it to stay within this. We'll come back to this in a second, but let's go ahead and add that thumb so that way we can see where it's positioned. Now this I want to be position of absolute, and then I want this to be a background color here, and here I'm going to do my background like this, and that way it takes on the same color as the actual background. Now once again, this is going to have a border radius, and this will be 100 V max, and then I want the height to be 1.25 M. And again, this is important that I'm using M's because it will be responsive based on my font size. And then the width, I obviously want to be the exact same. There are a couple ways to get this positioned exactly in the center. In this case, because everything is written out in M's and I've actually defined all the values, I can very quickly figure out exactly what I need it to be just by doing a little bit of math. So if you remember, if I come up top here, the whole height is 1.5 M, and I know that its height is 1.25 M. So that leaves me 0.25 M to play with. So let's just split that in half. We'll do 0.125 M for the top, and then on the left, we'll do the exact same thing, and that should put it exactly in the middle. Now let's go ahead and account for what happens when we check the switch. So if I come down here, I'm going to first of all grab my roll of switch once again, and I'm going to look to see if it is checked, which I can do with the pseudo selector of checked. When it is, I want to select its sibling, which I can do with a plus sign in CSS. We'll do custom check like that, and I'll set this background color now to my var. Actually, I need to wrap it in HSL, so var of accent. So you can see already that this one evidently was checked and this one wasn't. But if I check this one, now it works, and now this one works. All right, cool. But how do I get the thumb to move all the way over? Well, let's go ahead and grab all of this once again. I will copy this down. And what I want to do is after I've selected the custom check, I need to go inside the custom check, which I can do like this, to a direct sibling. We'll do custom check thumb. And in this case, what I want to do is run an animation. And here, let's set the length to 250 milliseconds. For the timing function, I could do something like ease, but I'm just going to copy in a cubic Bezier curve that makes it a little bit more dynamic. You're welcome to just grab this if you'd like. We'll set this to forward so it only runs once, and then we'll name it. And let's see, I usually do the names first, so I'll do toggle on, something like that. So let's write those keyframes down below here. So we'll say keyframes, and then you give it the name. So in this case, it'll be toggle on. And then you can pass it several values or states where it needs to animate. So you can do this in a couple different ways, but since we've got 3 different states, we're going to start with 0%. And here what I want to do is just set the width to what I already know it to be, which is 1.25 M. Now, one of the things you'll start to notice is we're copying down a lot of hard-coded values. Whenever I'm doing that, I start to recognize, you know what, I probably want to extract this just a touch. So what I could do is come up top here, and let's grab this height and width right here. So let me actually just grab the height because that's what matters. And let's extract this to a variable called toggle height. All right, and so let's come up top here. And again, I'm going to just define this on the entire root. So we'll say toggle height. And I'll set this to 1.5 M, which is what it was. So nothing should change. Now what we can do though is, if I come all the way back down this way, is I can grab this right here. What I can do is do a calculation and do var toggle height and just multiply it times 2. All right, so I know that that's twice as long, which is again how it should work. Now I've also got these heights to worry about. Now off the top of my head, I don't know what 1.5 times whatever equals. I can do some math here. I've got Raycast, which is my keyboard launcher, and I could do something like 1.5 times, I don't know, probably 0.8 something, 0.8, maybe it's 0.8333. Yeah, all right, so 0.8333, that's fine. All right, that'll work. So let's calculate my var of toggle height times 0.8333. 333. All right, that should be just fine. I'll move this down. Technically, it's not exactly in the middle, but if you can tell that micropixel, then go for it. Now, that also means, if you don't mind doing a little bit more math with me, that I can change these out. And this top, this will be left. And for these, I should be able to just move these back 1 decimal, and I think that will work. Yeah, there we go. So that puts it in the middle. Now, why am I doing it like this? Well, that way, basically, I can control everything with this one variable, and I don't have tons of constant, like, hard-coded values all throughout. Because everything else is done with math, I don't have to worry about it. I just have to change the one thing up top. So if I came up top here and I changed this to, I don't know, like 3rem or something like that, everything should adjust automatically. So let me move back down this way, and we now need to set this width to the same thing up top here. So let me grab this right here. And even though these are, again, hard-coded, they're hard-coded with math that's responsive to one single value, that toggle height. All right, so back to what we were doing, which is toggling these keyframes on. This, first of all, needs to be toggle with 2 Gs. Let's copy this down because I want it to end at the same state. So 100, just like that. Now, I want this, like, just before it gets halfway to already be at its full width. So it has really an elastic looking feel. So I'm going to take 40% here, and I'm going to set this width, and let's go ahead and grab that calculation once again, except in this case, I want it to be a little bit more than this. Let's grab this, and what I want it to do is to actually be a multiple of it. So we'll do like 1.5, maybe something like that. You can see it stretch out, 1.4, that'll work. Now what I need to do is actually move it over or translate it over. So let's do a transform, translate. And what I want to do is take my var of toggle height, and that's what I want to move it over. And this math works out because the whole thing is 3 times that size. Just to make this a little safer, I guess let's put this as toggle X like that. Now it just swoops over whenever I click it. This one should work as well. Now it doesn't actually work going back the other way. And here's where we eventually need to get JavaScript involved. But what I'm going to do first of all is go ahead and copy these keyframes down and switch it up just slightly. So we're going to have a toggle on, and then we'll also have a toggle off. Now in this case, what I want to do is start with it like this. This will be the middle, and this will be the end, except what I want to do is delay the full width until I get more than halfway. That way I get the stretch going the opposite way. The other thing I need to do is I need to move this transform up this way. That way it starts where it's at, and then I need to take this transform down here and translate it back to 0. We've got a couple other things we need to do in the CSS, but for now, let me come back over this way, and let's go ahead and just start working on the JavaScript. So here I'm going to grab my script, src, and we're going to point this to app.js. Now I need to set this as the type of module, or I can do defer and defer after the body as well. That works just as well, but this will actually do that as well, setting it as a module. Now over this way, just to make sure this is working, let's do console.log. It works. And then let's just check it over here. I'll open up the console. It works. Okay, cool. So what I want to do is select everything, first of all, that has a role of switch. Now, because I've got multiples of them, I'll say const, let's just call these like, actually, I don't even need to have any kind of declaration. Let's just do it directly on here. So we'll say document.query selector all, and I want to select anything that has a role of switch. Now, directly on the end of this, let's go ahead and loop through all of those. So for each here, and I'm going to call them toggles. You can call them whatever you want, but I'll call them toggles, and we'll do this as an arrow function. And I'm going to say toggle.add event listener, and I'm listening for a change. So whenever that change happens between checked and unchecked, this event should fire for each of these role switches. Once again, I have another arrow function inside of here for each of these event listeners. And what I want to do is, first of all, check, is it checked or not? And I can do that very quickly just by grabbing this out as a variable. We'll say is checked, and I'll set this to toggle.checked. That's going to tell me true or false, depending on what it is. And just to make sure that this is working, let's go ahead and copy this down like this, open up the terminal, and when I check here, it should tell me true, and now it should be tell me false for both of these. Perfect. Okay, so that's set and ready to go. Now that we know whether or not it's checked, we need to grab the thumb, the little icon, to move it back and forth, because that's actually where we will apply the animation. Now you might say, well, why don't we just apply it right away? Well, we can, kind of. If I come over here to the CSS, I could apply this toggle off anytime that this is not checked. So if I come down here and we set this to not checked like this, and I change this to toggle off, you'll notice that I can't actually toggle either direction. The only trouble is when I save it or refresh it, you see how they actually animate because it's toggled off, so it's going to animate that way. So it's a little kind of janky the way it looks, and that's basically why I'm using JavaScript. Now, you may not care about that, in which case you can get away with it just like this. You don't have to do any JavaScript, but I don't know. I kind of care about that. So I'm going to move this down like this. Let's come over this way and write a little bit of JavaScript. So let's go ahead and get let's just call it the thumb. And in this case, what I need to do, if I think back to my HTML, is I come over here. This is what I'm listening on. So I need to go to its sibling, and then I need to go down. Now, just because I don't exactly know that this will always be this way, maybe I add something else in between these for some reason or something like that. I think the safer route is to actually go up to grab the custom check wrapper and then to do a query selector inside of that for anything with this class, which there should be only one. So you could do it either way, but that's the way I think I'm going to do it. So what I'm going to do is on my toggle, which is the actual switch, I'm going to go up the DOM tree using the closest method. This closest looks up the DOM tree for anything that matches like a query selector going down, except it goes up. And here what I want is my custom check wrapper. So I've gone up to the parent. Now that I'm there, I'll do a query selector, and what I'm looking for is my custom check thumb. That should get me access to the actual thumb I need. So again, let me go ahead and console log this. If I come here and I check, it should actually give me access to the thumb, and it is not. And that's because I did not do this as a class. All right, here we go. Let's try this again. Check, there we go. All right, so it's actually giving me the thumb itself, which is the little icon. Again, over here, it should give me the thumb. All right, so now I've got the thumb there, and maybe to make this a little clearer, I'll just put these down on their separate lines just so you can see, but that should work just the same. So with the thumb, now I just want to basically figure out if it's checked or not and apply different animations. So I'll say style.animation. And we could do this in a couple different ways, but let's just write a ternary here. So I'll say is checked. So if it is checked, I'm going to have a state. And if it's not checked, I'm going to have a state. What I can do is come back over this way, and I can just steal all of this right here. And then in quotation marks, I can just add all of this. And again, right here. So this is going to be toggle off, and the other one will be toggle on. Now, you may be frustrated that I'm using single and double quotes. I don't really care about it. I just do whatever comes to me and let my linter fix that. So if you're interested in a linter video, I'm happy to show you that. I just do whatever, again, comes to me naturally. Now, I'm noticing that this somehow got changed, so this needs to be style like that. And now if I come over here and I click, it should move that way. And if I click, it should move back the other way. So cool, now it's all working. And when I refresh the page, it doesn't actually apply the style right away or the animation right away. It waits until I click. All right, so that's set and ready to go. That also means I can actually get rid of all of this because I don't need that anymore. Since we're applying all that in the JavaScript, we're set to go. Now, I do have a couple other things we need to think about. One is keyboard events. So if I keyboard down to these, you see I get kind of this ugly natural view, and I'd rather make that look a little nicer. So we can do that pretty quickly. First of all, if I move back up this way, let's go ahead and just copy down this roll of switch because I want to do a couple things. Normally, when I focus on this switch, it's going to focus on the entire area that it's around. What I want to do is I want to remove that outline. And I could just say none. I was watching a video by Kevin Powell recently that showed how on people who have like a high contrast view that it just basically messes you up if you do this. So he recommended that instead you say solid and you just set this to transparent because then it can enable that color as needed. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is copy this down and say that when it is focus visible, I want to grab the custom check sibling. And that's when I want to apply my own little border just around that custom check. So we can do this with a box shadow. I'm going to give this two different properties, 1.5M, and we'll set this to my var of background. Then I'll copy this down, put a comma in between these. We're going to change this to accent. In this case, I'm going to set this to 0.4M. Now what this means is if I come over here and you can see I have toggled to that with my keyboard, I now get this nice ring just around the custom check because that's what I've selected whenever the focus visible state is true on the switch or like it's been tabbed to. Now we can improve this a little bit more by coming over here and I can set a transition on this. And I want two transition properties. First of all, I've got my background color and then I've also got my box shadow. Now the background color I want to change at 400 milliseconds, and then I can use that same cubic Bezier curve, so let me find that right here. And I'll add a comma here and do the same thing, except in this case I want this to be like maybe 150 milliseconds on the box shadow with the same cubic Bezier curve, that's fine. So now if I tab over here, it should jump out a little more easily, and it's not because this is not how you write a transition. All right, so there we go. Now you can see how it kind of pops in and out, and I can speed that up maybe a little bit more even. Maybe it's like 80 milliseconds. It just kind of pops out. I like that. Now, one thing you'll note is if I come over here, I've lost my cursor altogether. So let me come in here to the custom check. We'll say pointer events of none because it's grabbing those pointer events. Now if I come over here, I should be able to click basically through it to the checkbox itself. Now there's probably one more ease of use thing we can do, and that is to come back over here and account for somebody who doesn't want that kind of movement. So there's a good reset here. Let's see, Andy Bell reset right here. If I jump down here, I can just grab this right out of here. So what it's going to do is remove any transitions for people who would prefer not to have that. Now I don't have anything with this HTML scroll behavior. So what it's going to do now though is if somebody prefers reduced motion, it will just snap it one way or the other very quickly. So if I jump back up this way, and you can see now it's like that. If I, however, come in here, hit Command-Shift-P and search for like, reduced motion. And with the DevTools open and I click here, it should just snap back and forth. So if they don't want that, they don't have to have it. But I kind of like the snappy behavior, and for those who like it as well, they can have it if they prefer normal motion. All right, so that's how I decided to solve this problem. I'd be curious if you have an improvement on this. Again, the way we set this up, it gives us a lot of flexibility. So I can come in here and change this, for instance, to like 20, and the entire site kind of takes on a reddish hue. I can also move up or down this font size, so like 1.2 rem. Everything should be responsive to that. Because this is using EMS, all the toggle height calculations are based off of this font size. So I come over here, that all works. I can change this to 3.2, and that gets way too big. Let's do like 2.5 rem, something like that. And now you can see how this just snaps back and forth. So with a little bit of CSS variable magic, you can see how you can quickly theme this out and you get this nice little snappy behavior back and forth. You might even want it a little bit faster than that. And if you do, that's just fine with me. So let's come over here. Let's set this to like 200 and 200. Make it just a little snappier. There we go. Just a little faster back and forth. Because we set those up as a roll-off switch, if I do Command, Function, and F5, it will turn my voiceover on. Let me move this over here so you can actually see what's going on. And you'll see below, it's actually reading off exactly what somebody is going to hear. So it tells it whether or not it's switched, and then it tells you how to interact with it. Now it tells it that this setting too is enabled on. And all that's because I've thought about accessibility as we've built this out. It's fun to play around with these CSS challenges, and you can see how there's actually quite a bit of thinking you have to do to get this to all work as expected. Hey, well, thanks so much for following along with me today. I hope you really enjoyed that. I'll be interested in your thoughts in the description. I'll catch you in the next one. Happy coding.